You got it?
Okay, now it says.
It says it's recording. Okay, again, this is the real. Sorry, there was some confusion this morning, but this is the recording of the class, and I welcome all of you who are there. Has everyone come back on the video? I think so. Okay, sorry about that. Who knows? One of those crazy little glitches that computers and software sometimes are. If that happens, we're going to begin. All right. We were talking about whether or not rabbis should um, endorse candidates from the pulpit. We last week we began. We saw the old IRS statements, which basically said synagogues are nonprofits and therefore are forbidden from endorsing a candidate. And we know that that was recently changed and is now allowable for those, ministers, rabbis, imams, anyone who is leading a congregation, even though there's a nonprofit, their nonprofit status is not in any way changed if they endorse.
Rabbi, who
Yes.
has allowed this? The government? Is there a
This
law?
this 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 is official policy of the government. Yes,
It
official
passed by
IRS
Congress and
government
the
policy.
president?
David, let me say. This
Yeah.
is now the official policy of the United States government, the IRS. Okay, it is official. Okay,
Yeah.
so the prior issue was that your nonprofit status could be revoked if you endorsed a candidate. That is no longer true. Okay. So the
Thank
question
you.
now is now that it's allowed, it's two different the question. Okay, it's allowed, but is it advisable? Is it proper? Okay. So we're going to take a look at a couple of generalized statements about that, and then we'll take a look at something very specific. Both we'll look at the Mamdani election in the mayor of New York City. We'll take a look at two rabbis who took some opposing positions. And then I also want to, well, probably not today, but I will show you some statements made about Minneapolis. And again, the question is it appropriate for a rabbi or a congregation to endorse a statement, which is also very political, and what are the benefits and what are the negatives? Okay, so here we are. We're back. We're all back again. Is everyone back? Do I see? Is Sima there? I don't know. Well, at least we're all back. All right. We started looking at this article by Michael J. Brody, who let's go down to the bottom of the document. Oops, a long document. Wow, there he is. Okay. Professor of law at Emory University. That's in Atlanta. I think most of us know that. An ordained rabbi, synagogue rabbi, law, religion, Jewish law, comparative religious law. Okay, so there he is, everyone. Is that large enough? Everyone can see that? Okay. We started looking at it last week. Okay. The Johnson Amendment, here's the technical, if you want to know the technical part. Johnson Amendment in the IRS for decades signaled that churches and synagogues risk their nonprofit status, i.e., you can't deduct from your taxes, your donations, if they participate or intervene in political campaigns on behalf or in opposition to candidates. Okay, this has changed. And last time we looked at it, we started. Now he's going to give get another cough drop. He's going to give a negative view as to why he is talking about it. Okay, we looked at the first one first, and we'll try to evaluate this. This is the first one. He's going to bring four reasons for clergy people not to endorse. Now, remember, he is an Orthodox rabbi and he is a law professor, but he's going to speak about many of these in terms of, is it a violation of halacha? Is it not only, okay, it's allowable now by civil law, but if you do so, are you violating Jewish law, which of course, in the Orthodox world, even in the general Jewish world, is a question, a very important question in the Orthodox world. Okay. He says there are four dangers. There are halakhic Jewish law and ethical concerns. The Torah's prohibition about placing a stumbling block before the blind, lifnei iver lo titain michshol. Now, that is a literal mitzvah. It is literally in the Torah and literally says, before a blind person, don't put a stumbling block. Understand the rabbis look at that, and first, you might say, what might be the problem with that verse? Well, very simply, you mean I need the Torah to tell me that I shouldn't trip a blind person walking down the street? Come on now, what are we talking about, right? So you might say, isn't that kind of obvious? And so the rabbis in the Talmud and in later Jewish codes say this is not specifically just about not tripping up a blind person walking down the street, but it's doing something that causes someone else to violate a rule or a law, i.e., you shouldn't go around touting your cryptocurrency when you know that once this other guy buys the cryptocurrency, you're going to sell yours and he'll lose his shirt, but you'll make a lot of money. Okay, that would be a clear violation under this. Okay. When a rabbinic imprimatur causes congregants to conflate divine will with a politician's program, right? You need to do this or vote for this candidate because that's what God says. Or to excuse grave misconduct because the rabbi said so. Notice he's talking about two different things. One, the idea that this particular political position is divinely sanctioned. Why is he adding? Look at the second one. Or to excuse grave misconduct because the rabbi said so. What do you think he's thinking about here? Anyone? Well, what if you think a politician is advocating a cause that you believe is ultimately right, but that particular politician has serious moral shortcomings, right? In other words, and we're talking reality here. There are politicians with serious moral shortcomings, but what if they advocate a policy that you think is right? Does that, what he's pointing out to is that excuse grave misconduct because the rabbi said so. Oh, that politician who we know has done some really bad things, but on this issue, we like him.
That's exactly what's happening right now, and that's why a lot of Jews are voting for Trump.
Well, let's assume that is certainly an example, but could you imagine a politician who is a great supporter of, say, the state of Israel, but has moral shortcomings?
Yes, we know.
From either side, and not from either side of the spectrum, right? Doesn't have to be just one side, but there too. Okay, so the result will either be a violation of this prohibition or a desecration of God's name, especially if the endorsed official behaves corruptly or even personally immorally. I advocate Mr. X despite their moral shortcomings. Does that mean that the moral shortcomings are okay? Okay, that's problem number one. Endorsements produce communal harms. Synagogues are politically diverse. Anchoring the synagogue to a candidate alienates the members. So what do you think about that issue? Real issue?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very realistic.
Realistic issue. Many synagogues, now there are exceptions, I would say. You can think of some synagogues. I'm thinking particularly, for example, in Manhattan, BJ, B'nai Jeshurun. B'nai Jeshurun and their rabbis, I've heard them speak, very clearly come out one side of the political spectrum. Frankly, even I would say I don't align with all their political positions. Many of them I do, but some I don't. So what about people who say, gee, their rabbi now aligns with the political positions that I oppose? What does that do to the congregation? Okay. Alienates members, undermines trust. Third, endorsements pose institutional risks. Even if formal penalties are uncommon, okay, we know that, sorry, but that's just not true anymore. We're going to skip that one. Fourth, endorsements create strategic costs. Rabbis serve as teachers of Torah and shepherds of souls. When they appear as party operatives, their capacity to speak across lines of difference diminishes. Coalitions against anti-Semitism and for religious liberty frequently require bipartisan cooperation. A reputation for partisanship can make such coalitions harder to build. What do you think about that issue? True.
He's right.
I'm not going to work with this politician who I've condemned and told people not to vote for, but he does come out against anti-Semitism. So how can I work with him? That's a problem. Okay. One might respond that silence bespeaks indifference, especially in moments of moral urgency. But what if there is a moment of moral urgency where one feels that the political differences are not just based upon political philosophy, but there is a moral issue so great that it transcends? Is that possible? Do you think that's possible? Or should we say, no,
Yes.
it is possible? So we've just given you reasons not to endorse. So are we saying that, wait a second, there might be a time to endorse if there are is there moral urgency? Yeah, Rini.
But he says in this that Jewish tradition demands a public voice for justice, but a public voice for justice in a specific cause is not the same as a partisan endorsement of a candidate. So a rabbi can give a point of view without naming a specific candidate and still express a strong point of view. And it becomes obvious, if you're at all tuned into the world, it becomes obvious what side the rabbi is on. But I know before we joined the Princeton Jewish Center, they had big issues between I don't think it was the rabbi, but it was between J Street and APAC.
Okay.
And the members and a lot of people left because of those tremendous differences between them. And so, and everyone was in support of Israel, but in a different way. So it's tricky. It's very tricky.
Okay, just to be clear, the examples that Rena used, there are many organizations, Zionistic organizations in America. AIPAC had been for many, many, many years trying to be the mainline. We support Israel. Generally, we support the Israeli government, whether it's to the left or to the right. With the Israeli government being as strongly right-wing as it has been for so long, there have been many people who have found AIPAC too closely aligned with Netanyahu. Other organizations, such as J Street, is an organization that is more critical of Israel. And people have very strong opinions whether or not how and when one can be critical of Israel by still supporting the state of Israel, but being critical of the current government. That's a distinction that J Street makes, right? Some people would say you can't make that distinction in the United States. Support of Israel is so important. It's not fair for American Jews who don't live there to criticize the Israeli government. So yes, you have a lot of American Jews, some who support AIPAC or Zionism or some form of Zionism, and some who feel that J Street has gone too far, right? So would it be appropriate, let's not even talk candidates, for the rabbi to get up on the bima and say, support J Street, or support APAC, or support like the ZOA. That's another American Zionist organization, but that is particularly right wing, right? So the question is that they can cause those divisions. Is it better than to just talk about values? Well, yeah, you could talk about values, and you could be, okay, you know what I'm talking about, but I'm not naming names, right? Okay. Is that a good or a bad position? Do we like that?
I think a rabbi is in a very tough position. And our current rabbi really does not like any political discussion coming from the pulpit. She just won't allow it from anybody who's making any kind of a speech or anything. But she does, in her own way, you know, ask. She asks for thoughtfulness and peace and commitment. And she, I don't think you can help but let your views somehow come out. It's pretty hard for a
Okay.
person to be, completely a blank slate. But
Right.
I think she does it in a very good way, and without naming candidates or anything political, you know.
Okay. So right. I mean that can be a way. So the question, so we'll look at is that talk about indifference. Right. Those of you who members of when I was rabbi at the Fallon Jewish Center, someone once said to me not long ago, when I was the rabbi there, they were not aware of which side of the political spectrum I personally, where I stood on that. I'm curious. Those of you who've heard me speak much, do you think I was clear or not on politicians, politics, which side of the political spectrum I might have stood on?
Yeah. No,
I'm sorry, Fran, what did you say?
no, you never divulged any of your feelings.
Like clear on the values.
Right, but you stood for the values and justice and the right things always, ethical, moral issues.
Right.
Okay, David, were you going to comment?
Yes, I knew your positions, even though I didn't speak to you. You're a human being, and listening to many sermons of yours, which I thought were very good, by the way. I had a feeling where you were coming from.
You think I was more to the left or the right of the political center?
I thought that you were a Democrat, maybe a little bit to the left, okay, but I think you're centrist, and I thought it was evident. And then there's the other thing too, you know, we speak to our clergy in a personal way many times, and we speak to them as human to human in a group, among a number of people, or even alone. And I really, had this sense of where you were at. And since it was close to where I was at, it was comfort. But other rabbis who I've been a member of a congregation, etc., I also had the same ideas in terms of where they were at on issues.
I appreciate that. But imagine if you were a member of a congregation and now you have a rabbi who is not where you are at, either because of what the rabbi has said from the bima or through personal interaction, where the rabbi is at a very different place from where you are at.
Okay, to add to that, a member of our congregation who happens to be for Trump, the person said to me, gee, I would like to have a rabbi who, in the first 5 minutes, you don't know who they voted for in the past election. And
Okay.
I understand that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
go on.
I mean, I thought I appreciate that. I think I succeeded in not. I certainly did not advocate candidates, and I certainly tried to advocate views. Although, as some of you may have heard, I did give a sermon about a year ago, actually last summer, where I think I was a little bit clearer as to where I stood politically. Hey, what the heck? I'm retired. I don't care anymore. Sorry.
Well, there was a furor in the congregation. There was not a big furor, but people, and I don't even know what you said. I happen to have not been there, but people were reacting to it. People who even agreed with you. I don't know what you said. Now,
Oh,
and then the whole question is that you're the rabbi emeritus. So, what are the moral codes of the rabbi emeritus?
well, that's a good question. Let me answer that. We'll go back to this in a minute because I do think I want to go back to this. And Tammy, I see you have a comment. Look, number one, hey, as a rabbi emeritus, frankly, I feel a lot more freedom to be clear about my political beliefs on the Bima. And like I said, okay, you don't like it, I don't think I'm causing disturbances in the congregation. I'm not the rabbi anymore. What did I say? One of the great topics of my sermon, that sermon I gave you last summer, was an expression that I really felt very alienated and alone from where our country is going, and that the country is moving in a direction and things are being done that I feel are contrary to what I understand America to stand for. That's what I said. Okay. I don't know. Tammy, were you there? I don't know. You probably weren't.
I didn't hear that one, but
And I got a lot of, frankly, I got a lot of positive feedback from that. Of course, people who didn't like it probably didn't want to say anything to me. People who did like it said, "Gee, I like that." So I did get quite a bit of positive feedback, and I'm sure there was a lot of people who didn't like it. So I felt. Did I name names? Actually, I did, frankly, thank Trump for
Right.
support of Israel.
Right.
That sermon, I specifically said that. But I also specifically said that I feel alienated and alone because I feel that our country is moving in a direction that is contrary to what I understand America to stand for. That's what I said. Okay. Okay, Tammy, you were going to comment.
I was just going to say that if I was in a congregation and a rabbi stood up and said things, anti-Israel, because, there's some ultra Orthodox groups that are anti-Israel and are anti-American democracy, I would have left. I would have called that rabbi, spoken to him, and told him I can't be a part of this congregation.
Well, but we are seeing that question, and it's subtle and it's a difficult one. And I'll have to admit, I'm not I don't have to deal with these in the ways that my colleagues have to, who are still
right
working, of how one speaks and talks about Israel, and at the same time, one may feel also alienated from the direction of the current Israeli government. I mean, that is a question which, frankly, my views were, I want the congregation to be a very pro-Zionist congregation, and I want to be clear on what unites us in our love of Israel. And frankly, from the Bima, I was very careful not to be a critic of Israel. Some of my colleagues feel differently, but that can cause all these issues that he's talking about. Okay. Any other comments before we go on? Tammy?
Yes, I just read the book As a Jew by Sarah Hurwitz, and she goes into this in great detail, and everybody should read that book because she mentions the fact, anti-Israel is now affiliated with anti-Semitism, and they're both together. And the people who are against us are putting these two issues together. It's good for the family to fight and discuss their opinions, but for outside people, we're the targets of the anti-Semites who are lumping us all together. And you got to be very careful about your criticism because, as I said, within our group, we can tear each other apart, but we're the family. And I think it's very important to read her opinions, and I think that's what she's saying. But the outside world is like, oh, you're critical of Netanyahu. Well, let's destroy Israel. They're genocide people.
Yeah,
So
and
you've got to be careful.
I agree with you, because if you follow what's happening in Israel closely, and I hope all of you do, Netanyahu is in a path, and I'll say this directly right here, to destroy the democratic nature of the Israeli government. That's what he's doing. And he has been foiled so far by other Israelis, and he is criticized, and there are demonstrations against him, which I actually would agree with.
Right.
But the problem that Tammy points out is that there is so much anti-Semitism, and people who want to destroy the state of Israel, they see criticism of the Netanyahu government as validation of their viewpoint of destroying the state of Israel. So it's a real issue. Okay, let's go. Any other comments? I want to go back to this, and we'll
Yes.
go back to this.
Okay,
David?
Rabbi, if and I'm going to jump. I'll jump to that Cosgrove.
No, we'll get to that. We're going to look at that.
Okay, but what I want to say, putting together what you had said on the Bima, and it's with all respect and etc. I think it might have been worded, if I were the rabbi, okay, not a rabbi emeritus, to look at it from an empathetic point of view.
Okay.
That there are people, and to bring in religion, to bring in sources of religion, and then it's up to us as conservative Jews, to take your information and in our lives, in our community, process it, and to see what conclusions and what maybe there are no conclusions we can personally come to. Okay,
fair enough. We'll take I have they are our text. We will look at Rabbi Cosgrove's sermon. We will look at Rabbi Buchdahl's sermon. I will tell you when we get there, not before, when we get there, what I might have said were I a rabbi in New York during the mayor's election, and we'll see the differences between the two, and we'll see what they chose to say and what they chose not to say. But let's go through this a little bit before we get there. Okay. Now, here is a danger, which I think this article points out, and I think it is a danger. And look at the statement. The central premise of this analysis is that Jewish law, halacha, does not impose a generalized duty on Jews to police non-Jews into compliance with Jewish law or general Noahide ethical norms. I have a real problem with that statement. Anyone comment on that statement? Now, here's an article that's telling rabbis not to endorse. And he's saying, what is he saying?
That we shouldn't give our opinions to other people.
Right, on ethical issues.
That's stupid.
Wait a second.
Yeah, we're the Jewish people of the book. We are ethical people.
Aren't we or Lagoyim, a light to the nations? Don't we brag about all the famous Jews who stood up for moral causes in the past in America? Now he's saying it's not imposed. We don't have a generalized. He's leaving a little leeway here. But I have to say, I have a real problem with what he just said with that statement.
Yes,
because that statement would basically say, stay out of all moral discussions of your society. Or let's say he's trying to say, you're not obligated to comment on every single statement, which I think what bothered me with that statement is almost saying not only you're not obligated, but really you shouldn't. if there is a great moral wrong in society, you have no obligation to comment on it. Yeah, I'm a little bothered by that. Do you want your rabbis to comment on the moral issues of the times in the society? Even if you disagree with their conclusions?
Right.
Right? We always like, we just like to talk about the Jews who were involved in the civil rights struggle. So is it real question? I think he's reading it too broadly. Okay. In practice, Jewish voters and rabbis are not charged to transform America. When he says a Noahide polity, there are moral obligations that the Torah speaks about for the non-Jewish world. That's what he's talking about, the Noahide polity. In other words, general moral rules. There are several of them in the Torah. We are charged to keep mitzvot, build Jewish institutions, we are not the world's ethical policemen. Tammy, I see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you.
It's a very narrow view of life. Very parochial.
Yeah, it's very parochial. And he is emphasizing that, now he's an Orthodox rabbi, and he's emphasizing that this is what we are not obligated to do. Now,
he's living in a bubble.
Well, now he does say the classical diasporic posture says, seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, for in its welfare you shall find your welfare. He talks about the law of the kingdom is a law. Now, there is a review that Dina de Malchuta Dina, we as Jews follow the laws of where we live, okay? The preference in much of modern Orthodox thought for strong religious liberty coupled with a robust civil order. Who would deny that? But he's giving some very generalized things. So now he's going to talk about some specific issues, okay? Abortion. Should rabbis endorse candidates based upon their view of abortion? By the way, we know there are other religious groups in America who will. One issue. Either if you agree with us on abortion, we think you're moral and right. If you disagree with us on abortion, we think you're immoral and wrong, right? There are groups in America that take this as one issue, right? Halacha generally restricts abortion, but does not reduce it to murder, right? So, given this complexity and divergence between halachic rules for Jews and rules for non-Jews, Jewish law does not map neatly into a single public policy. Okay, but he has argued that American law should preserve a zone of decisional freedom. In other words, he's clearly saying law should not totally forbid abortion. But he says, knowing that a regime that permits abortions, we would not, he's, taking a very narrow view of abortion. This conclusion flows not from moral indifference, but from humility about legislating contested theology into civil law and from a principled commitment to religious. So he's saying, we should allow for some abortions. He's not saying that shouldn't be a litmus test. What about minority rights? This is an interesting question. There was a group called Santeria concerning animal sacrifice. Yeah, they sacrifice chickens, maybe goats. I don't remember. Any of you remember that? Why defend rights we reject theologically? Should they be defended or should they be prosecuted? Endorsing candidates who champion robust free exercise of religion. Okay, so we should do that. Okay. So he's saying a candidate who is committed to pluralism and similarly hate crime enforcement, communal security. Endorsing a candidate who takes these threats seriously is defensible application of protecting the Jewish public square, even if other things about the candidate might make one squirm. So you have a candidate who believes in spending money, federal governmental money on security issues for synagogues. Endorsing a candidate who takes these threats seriously is a defensible application of protecting Jewish public square, even if other things about the candidate might make one squirm. Well, what do you think about that? We have a candidate who says, increase federal funding for security for synagogues. Fairlawn Jewish Center, Congregation B'nai Shalom Fairlawn Jewish Center has received federal funds for security matters. So could we endorse a candidate who agrees to that, but who has other issues we disagree with?
No.
Well, he seems to think that would be okay. Fair courts, honest rates, okay. It's important to recognize that clergy endorsements can backfire. An endorsement that plays well in one news cycle might find backlash. Judicious non-endorsement paired with vigorous moral teaching and civic engagement preserves the greater influence. Now, that's what we talked about before. Non-endorsement, vigorous moral teaching. Do we like that? Okay. So, if after weighing the risk, a rabbi chooses to endorse certain criteria, security, religious liberty, democratic stability, and the rule of law, justice, and social welfare. Now that, notice he's adding social welfare, which can be defined very broadly or very narrowly. Character integrity, right? And long-term, okay. Okay. So I think we can agree that he's talking about, this, I think this issue of a non-endorsement. Okay. Do you like his view? Do you think the non-endorsement, more vigorous moral teaching and civic engagement? Do we like that?
Yes.
Okay, we'll see. Okay. That's that. So we're going to stop that share and we'll see that that actually his position excuse me. Oops, I had to stop that share. Okay, I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay, I gotta move this over. Give me a second here. All right, does everyone see this other document I have here now?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now this document was put out and endorsed by the Rabbinical Assembly. That's the conservative movement, the reform movement, CCAR, Reconstructionists, a lot of organizations as well. You see at the bottom there. Okay. So what is this? What does this suggest? Leading without endorsing. Guidance for Jewish clergy amid shifting IRS enforcement. In other words, now that the IRS is not going to, by the way, do you mind if I go? I know we had trouble at the beginning. Do you mind if I go a little late today?
No, we don't mind.
I'm okay with that if you are. Okay. So why clergy should not endorse candidates? Congregation's integrity, right? Preserve your community. You don't want rifts in your community. Prevent exploitation of your institution. Endorsement opens the door to political coercion, including threats or promises. In other words, let's face it, a lot of these endorsements, there's a lot of transactional nature of these things. You don't want to get into the transact. Oh, you endorse us? Well, we'll help you with that. You don't endorse us? We're not going to help you with that. Excuse me, we got another cough drop. There we go. Okay. Now here he says, staying nonpartisan doesn't mean staying silent. Preach values, not parties. Right? We saw that. Model plural. Create space for congregants of all views to feel respected, heard, and nourished without political litmus tests. Okay. Host civic education forums. Advocate on issues. Support those in need. Show up in coalitions, so acting grounded in Jewish traditions. Now here, again, this is a little contrary to what we just read, saying that, yes, you should be concerned about supporting those in need. Support democratic institutions. Okay, so this is a generalized statement about public policy for clergy that has been endorsed by most of the movements in America. Okay, do we all like this one? Any comments,
Yes.
questions about what he's suggesting? Meaning they show up. Okay. Let's take a look at an opposite position. Oh, where that goes. Where did it go? I may, okay. Oh, is this it? Wait a second. I want to see something. Yeah, okay. Let's take a look at another viewpoint. Let me make this clearer. Okay, is that large enough? Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The IRS says rabbis can endorse candidates. Should. Now, this is from Rabbi Joshua Hammerman, conservative rabbi who's now retired. He'd been in a congregation, I don't remember if it was in Connecticut or upstate New York. We are in the midst of a catastrophe that is caused by people who have names, people who should be publicly condemned. He's going to take an opposite position, right? So, progressive clergy seems to be leaning towards sticking with the old practices, while conservatives are using this new wrinkle as a license to bring politics to the pulpit. There is certainly true of the center-left Jewish streams in America, which have responded to the IRS shift with a message to rabbis that nothing should change. The stuff that we just saw. As a matter of fact, that document that we just previously looked at, this is the document he says, leading without endorsing. Candidate endorsements risking over-personalized policy. And he says, I've never endorsed a candidate from the pulpit. I'm not endorsing them now. Okay. In New York City, for instance, an outright pulpit endorsement of a mayoral candidate this year would only play into the hands of those who cynically seek to divide Jew from Jew. We'll go into that in detail when we look specifically at those sermons. But he's taking it to opposite positions. Sermons can no longer just be about mere values and issues when our future is in the hands of malevolent people. Agree or disagree with that statement? What do you think? This is saying the opposite of the document we just looked at, which told clergy people not to endorse individuals. Are we now in a situation where there is such malevolence in political leaders that overrides all of those cautions which we just looked at about endorsing individuals? That's the question, right? And while I might not advise endorsements from the pulpit, it does not mean we can't have outright condemnations. We are in the midst of a conflagration, and this catastrophe is being caused by human beings who have names. Wow. This year, to avoid the topics of Israel, Trumpism, and anti-Semitism would be a dereliction of rabbinic duty. So a rabbi might as well speak from the heart without constraints. It's not about endorsements, it's about urgency. It's about whether the sound of the shofar is going to be a clarion call for action or a soundbite for Somonex. Rabbi Hammerman writes very well. At a precise moment when American Jews need courageous words from the pulpit, there will be the same old Monty Python-esque nudge, nudge, wink, wink. he's saying that sometimes when you talk about values from the pulpit, it's kind of, oh, here I'm talking about this value, but you know what I'm really talking about. He's talking against that, artfully dodging what is really on people's minds. So he's saying politics happens everywhere when people care about a portion. It's such about debate them. Okay. It is incumbent upon those preaching core values of tolerance, kindness, and equity, and equality, not to waste a precious millisecond fighting a new technicality, or still abiding by old gentlemanly practices when we should be gearing up for a more existential fight. Honest, forceful messages that don't end in some intellectualized, equivocating wink wink. So this is what he's saying. By the way, he's retired. He's also not facing this. To my colleagues, no more leaving it to the congregants to draw their own conclusions about what you hope they will do. No more countering scorched earth policies with strongly worded statements filled with plausible deniability. I wish the Johnson Amendment preventing the endorsement of candidates hadn't been eliminated, and I do fear greatly the injection of political machinery, including dark money, into religious institutions. I fear the future of such church-state separation, but we can't pretend that the change hasn't happened. It's time to seize what the IRS has given us and run with it. Now, he is saying rabbis should name names. We all just agreed with what we saw about non-endorsements. He is arguing that there is such a moral crisis. This supersedes those cautions that we just read. What do you think?
I agree.
Wait, you just agreed with the last guy.
I agree with the last guy, but also I think there are boundaries. And when you cross that boundary, you have to go into this mode that Rabbi Hammerman said. If you look on the internet today, there are millions of people picketed throughout the country because of the killings in Minnesota. And all of a sudden, Trump backed down. Without millions of people, he would have continued to kill more people in Minnesota. So it is important to speak up. It's important to write to your congressman. It's important to act. And I think we all have that middle philosophy that you first said, but when you cross the line, what are you going to sit back or say, compare it to Hitler? How many people sat back and said, oh, this is just, nothing? Well, it isn't nothing. It's the beginning. So we have to cross the line and we have to act.
But should rabbis on the pulpit name names?
If they have to, they have to.
Well, okay. That's the question. The previous documents we saw said rabbis should not name names should not endorse politicians by name. Rabbi Hammerman is arguing that the moral catastrophe that he sees in America is such that we should name names, right? And we know and we just saw there are negatives that could happen if you name names. So the question is, at this point, do you just complain about the policies that are we all would, I think, would agree that you can complain about the policies, but do you name names and endorse specific politicians or condemn specific politicians?
Well, who is responsible for the actions, the bad actions? So, you could say it 64 ways without saying the name, but you can also say the name because he's ultimately responsible.
Okay, so Rabbi Hammerman was saying, say the name, while the other positions were, okay, condemn it, but don't say the names. Right? Those are the two positions we have here. Right? Anyone else want to comment? Should we say the names or just condemn the policies and the values?
I had a professor in college, philosophy instructor, and in fact, he was the chairman of the Jewish Studies department. And he always would say, there's an exception to every rule. And I think that you have to be very careful when to invoke that saying names. And I think
Okay.
it's not a light issue. And then from that stance, hey, with Hitler, you know, when should they have said that? We saw that Rabbi Shapiro, the Hungarian rabbi that you mentioned in a text, I think, and for the public fast day.
Mhm.
Uh, okay. Anyway, I that's how I look at it. Okay, and you
Okay.
really
Okay. Okay. Ed.
I don't know. I think, in today's current situation, everything is so black and white. Do you really need to say names?
Mhm. Okay, that's the question that Rabbi Hammerman is saying that you need to, while the others would be saying no, you don't need to, and you're suggesting that the quote the values discussion is sufficient. That is that that it's very
It'll
clear.
be clear as to who you're talking about when you say, you talk about the rioters in Minnesota and the trouble being caused by ICE,
Mhm.
it's the Trump administration that's doing it. You don't have to mention them by name.
Okay. Any other suggestions do you think would be appropriate? Okay. Uh, we're going to see next. Actually, well, yeah, I think we'll end this soon. We're going to see that there's the mayor's election in New York City that really, excuse me, turns on that question as to is this such a moral catastrophe or issue that, as Ed said, was that race for the mayor one that is the exception to the rule? We'll also take a look next week at some statements that have been made. There have been statements about the Minneapolis situation made by certain Jewish groups, and I'll bring them next week, and I'll tell you how some rabbis have dealt with them. And we'll look at with this question as I think as we've seen, there are a lot of good reasons, even though the IRS has told us that you can endorse candidates, there are a lot of good reasons not to name names. And you can be pretty clear what you're talking about, just talking about values. And I think we all disagree with the idea that Jews do have a voice in the general moral issues in the society. And the question is, is this a time where things have gotten such where names should be mentioned? Okay, we're going to take a look at that and how that played out in New York in two synagogues next time. Any final comments or questions before we end?
Don't forget the Pope came out against what Trump was doing. The Catholic bishops in this country came out, and now the rabbis are coming out. So I
Well,
think it's time. Yeah, a
there
group
were
of
many
rabbis.
rabbis at that. It didn't get quite as much publicity as I thought it should.
Right.
Huge march on Friday afternoon in Minneapolis. And actually, there were a number of rabbis who were at that march. Actually, they were having accommodations. They were trying to tell rabbis, since it was getting close to Shabbat, how what they should do because it was Friday afternoon. And I'm not sure, because of obviously everything else that was happening, that march, which was supported by many rabbis, uh, got much publicity. We'll talk about that some more next week. Okay. Any other comments, questions before we leave? Sorry about the beginning. I don't know what happened there. Some electrons were just not obeying what they're doing to do. But good. I think this is a really important discussion um, about the politics of today, and we'll continue next
It,
week.
it won't forget the program at 8 o'clock tonight. Weasel on Channel
I
13.
think it's 8 or 9. It may be 9. I'm not sure.
I think it's 8.
Yeah.
I think they said
Okay.
8. Or
and
maybe it's
also
9. Yeah.
yeah, and also Rabbi, the best part to me is you sound better than last week, so you
Oh,
are
yeah.
healing, and
Yeah,
and that
I'm healing from the pneumonia bit by bit, slowly. I don't see it day by day, but you're right. Thank you, David. Thank you all for concern. I'm going to see the doctor on Thursday, but I'm definitely starting to feel a lot better. Not perfect. The cold, even if you briefly go out in the cold weather, it really is not a good thing for me. It really brings on the coughing.
You didn't do any snow shoveling this weekend?
No, actually, Rhonda did a lot of snow shoveling yesterday. One of our cars was, they snow plowed the road in our development, but of course that blocked one of the cars where it was parked. But we're okay now. So,
Rabbi, I have a very reasonable shoveler. So if you're in need, so Rhonda doesn't have to, you can contact me.
We're at the moment. Actually, our next door neighbor also helped out a bit, so that was good.
Good.
Yeah, stay warm. Hopefully, maybe not the next week or so. It's not going to melt too much, but
Are we
Not gonna
supposed to get
at all.
we're supposed to get another storm on the weekend?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll keep going on Zoom next week. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob.
All
Thank you.